Being human. Do you ever wonder what makes us who we are? Our habits, preferences, or where we came from? We are expressing ourselves in thousands of ways every day through our choices. Let's have a conversation with people who are having interesting lives. My name is Alun Walker. I'm a doctor of chiropractic and a human being. So welcome to Being Human. We have a great friend of mine on the podcast today. Someone who's travelled all over the world, very well travelled man, both him and his wife. Someone who has been training chiropractors for many, many years, and someone who's been involved in the business at a very high level for many years. Also somebody who has been training myself over the last, on and off for the last probably 7 years, the first time that I ever met this chiropractor. And I'm very, very pleased to have with us Dr. Tim Young. So welcome to the podcast, Tim.
I appreciate you. What a great introduction. I'm very humbled by that, but thank you, and I appreciate you very much.
So, Tim, there's a few things that I want to ask you about today. Firstly, I'm always interested in the beginnings of how you became a chiropractor and where you lived and how you first saw chiropractic. But also, I'm obviously interested in the training that you do. And I understand that you're coming to the UK for Focus. And so if you can give us some more information about that and some ideas about what you'll be doing and the dates, that'd be wonderful.
Yeah, I have a coaching group, a consulting group called Focus Foundations. And the information on that same website, focusokc.com, is all the information on that. I have doctors in 50 different countries that are training. And what I've done is I've went in with video and I've created everything I think, say, and do in practice within this program. So when you join the program, you have a series of videos that will show you in my office. It's not like I'm going to tell you what I used to do. You're really going to be able to watch what I did. I just recorded a consultation and exam that I did last week, and I put it on this program. So you can, it's just like you're standing in my office watching me. And for those that don't know me, I've run a very high volume practice. I've seen as many as 250, 260 patient visits in a day, just me and 2 CAs. And I've done this with no marketing, no advertising, all word of mouth. And that's what I'm going to teach. And so if, I teach technique, I teach how to read x-rays, I teach how to do a consultation, exam, report of findings. I mean, anything that you would want to know, a lot of personal development. One of the biggest things that I coach and teach with all my doctors, it's important what you do, but it's more important is who you are when you're doing it. And so as a chiropractor, who you are when you step into the office, what the core essence of who you are, that's what translates to that patient. And so we work a lot on those kind of things too. So if anybody has any interest in learning more about themselves, about chiropractic, about philosophy, about technique, about the science of the adjustment, it's all available in that program.
So Tim, one of the questions that I'm obviously interested in is how you became a chiropractor. Were you sort of born this wonderful chiropractor, or did something change? Who were the people that were important to you in your life? Who were the chiropractors that made the best difference?
So, what's interesting is this morning I was on the phone with my book publisher where my book is, I just got 3 more chapters done. We're working on getting a book about all of this. But I was raised in the country of Missouri, in the United States, right in the middle of the country, Southwest Missouri. I was raised in a country, and very, very poor and humble beginnings. I mean, we hunted and we fished and we grew all of our food out of the garden. We milked cow. Well, we actually milked goats. That's where we got our milk. So I was raised very poor. I didn't have anything. And fast forward, my father took a job with Hormel. I don't know if you guys have Hormel over there. It's a meat packing company. They produce different bacon and meat and all those different things. He worked there. So we moved to town, which was Springfield, Missouri. Well, I had an uncle that I had never met before that was a chiropractor. And I started seeing him when I was in the 5th grade, just, bike accidents, football, sports. I would go see my Uncle Bill. And I'm making a very long story short, but this is how, growing up, again, without anything. And then I was influenced by my uncle. He would adjust it. I didn't know what that meant. I mean, I'm back hurt and I go see my Uncle Bill and he would adjust me, but I didn't learn anything about it. Well, when I was 18 years old, I was in a very severe car accident. It was I broke my back. I broke my lower back. I broke ribs, a concussion. It was probably shouldn't have walked away from it. It was a really, really a severe accident. And I had just started, I was 18 years old and I just started bodybuilding. I wanted to be a bodybuilder and I broke my back and all. And so the orthopedic doctor came into the room after they did the MRIs and he said, well, I got some bad news. He said, well, the good news is you're alive. You're lucky to be alive. And said, the bad news is your bodybuilding days are over and more than likely you're going to have a significant limp for the rest of your life due to your injuries. Well, you can only imagine being 18-year-old and just getting started to get this news. Well, I couldn't even walk for over a week because I had so much swelling in my lower back. But then when I was able to walk and get around, I went to see my Uncle Bill, the chiropractor. And I told him what the orthopedic doctor said, and I won't repeat it on here. This is a family channel, but he had a few choice words, and he said, lay on the table, and he started to adjust me. 6 weeks from that moment, 6 weeks later, I was back in the gym. 6 months later, I won my first bodybuilding show, Mr. Teenage Missouri. It planted a seed and it changed the course of my life. Fast forward, I didn't decide to be a chiropractor then. I was going to do all these different things. I joined the military. I joined the United States Navy. I wanted to be a Navy SEAL. That was what I wanted to do. And while I was in the Navy, I started doing a lot of extra training, trying to prepare to go into SEAL training, right? And so as I was doing this, I started having a lot of lower back pain. Well, I'm in the military. I'm 21 years old, 22 years old, I guess, at this time. And the military doctors, they did their exams and all their testing and stuff. And they called me in, Alan. This was the summer of 1988. They called me into the office in Chicago, Illinois, up in this big building, and they said, well, we know you have a problem, but we don't know what the problem is. So what they're recommending is exploratory back surgery. Well, Alan, I'm 22 years old. I don't know anything, but what I do know is the word exploratory and back surgery should never be used together. And they're not doing it, and they're not going to do it to me. And I looked at this lady, and of course I'm in the military, and it's different. When you join the military, you're government property. They own you. But I looked at her and said, no, ma'am, we'll not do that. And she was really confused. She was shocked. She said, I'm sorry. She goes, no, ma'am, I will not do that surgery. And she looked down and she looked at the file and she said, well, the only thing we can do is send you home. And Alan, at that very moment, and I've told this story 1,000 times, but I can never articulate the power of that moment. God laid his hand on my shoulder and said, you will be a chiropractor. I knew right then. I didn't know what that meant. I had never thought about it. It was not on the radar. I was going to be a Navy SEAL. I was a warrior. No, you're a chiropractor. And I smiled and I said, send me home. And I got out of it took forever. I got out of the Navy and went back home. I worked building chain link fence for a summer. Started my undergrad that January and didn't stop until I got my degree. And it wasn't easy, but it was an interesting, so it's the way God leads us down this path of, I have a story, a significant story. I know that chiropractic, if it wasn't for chiropractic, I wouldn't be doing anything. And so that's why I'm so passionate about this profession. And I could tell stories for hours on the miracles I've seen within chiropractic, but the miracle in my own life, that's what led me to this moment right now.
So you're speaking about the original adjustment that you received that changed your life. I'm interested in the interpretation that you give so eloquently often about what's actually happening in the body when you're giving that adjustment.
Well, so if I understand your question correctly, when I first got adjusted, I'll never forget my very first adjustment. I was between the 4th and 5th grade. I literally thought he ripped my head off. It scared the hell out of me because I had no idea what he was doing. You can imagine that first cervical adjustment. And I remember it like it was yesterday. And he didn't explain anything. He just did. He's what we called an old country hillbilly chiropractor. He just adjusted. He didn't do exams. He didn't do therapy. He said lay down and just went to work. He graduated from Cleveland Chiropractic School in Kansas City in 1966. So he'd been doing this a while, right? Well, so back then it was just, you just got adjusted and everything got better. You didn't question it. It's just part of it. I went to school I went to the same chiropractic school. I went to Cleveland Chiropractic School in Kansas City. I graduated in 1990. Well, I walked in 1993. I got my degree in 94 because of some extra classes I took. But with that being said, the question is, what is chiropractic? And this is what after 30 years, almost 30 years of practice, this is what I know to be true, Alun. This is what chiropractic is. Chiropractic is going into the spine and looking for stress. Stress in the spine is caused by one major accident, one major trauma, or repetitive trauma through time, whether it be bad posture, work, sleeping improperly, whatever it may be, or a car accident, a fall, it doesn't matter. And when you have stress and insult to the spinal joints, those joints will protect themselves by locking up and getting tight, trying to restrict the motion so it doesn't do more damage. That's how the body works. It's physiology. This isn't debatable. This is physiological fact. Our job as a chiropractor is to locate that stress, introduce motion back into the joint, maintain motion long enough to allow that joint to then heal. When you do that, it takes a stress off the nerve supply, off the tissue. Now the brain can communicate to the tissue at a higher level. It can communicate and allow the healing potential. As chiropractors, that's what we do. And the problem with that is it sounds too easy. It sounds too simple. And most people want to complicate it because they think that can't be enough. But what they don't understand, Alun, is that is a miracle. That is a miracle. When we give a specific adjustment, the majority of what we see is, oh, that feels better. But you have to ask yourself, why? Why does it feel better? But then the other question is, well, I've adjusted a little 4-year-old boy that had kidney failure. His kidneys were the size of raisins. I adjusted hemivertebrae in a third lumbar, and his bowels weren't working. He wasn't growing. He had to wear a diaper at almost 5 years old. I start adjusting. His bowels start working. His kidneys grow back. He grows 7 inches and put on 30 pounds. Okay, why? It's this exact same reason that I feel better after an adjustment, the same reason that his kidneys grew, his bowels started working, he grew 6 inches. It's exactly the same principle. So yes, it is as simple as making an adjustment, but what's going on within the body, the brain releasing chemicals and endorphins and hormones and the healing properties and allowing the innate intelligence of the body to express, that is a miracle that God has given us. And this is what chiropractors, this is where they fail, because they take that for granted. They just start taking it for granted that all they're doing is manipulating the spine, and that is not it. That is not it. They are connecting the brain to the tissue cell. There's not a more powerful job than that right there.
So Tim, we've all had these chiropractic moments where we've used an adjustment and something amazing's actually happened with our clients. Do you have any amazing stories like that?
Oh, I've got so I have so many. I will tell you what, I have babies that weren't supposed to be born because their mother wasn't supposed to get pregnant, told that she couldn't get pregnant, and the mom comes in at 19 years old, right? And I started adjusting mom, and now mom had a baby, and now that baby is bringing their babies. So it's so wrap your mind around that. My favorite story to tell on this, and I've got millions of them, and I'll tell it very quickly because I know we're on time. So a mother, a lady was coming in, her and her husband. She wasn't told that she couldn't have a child, but they weren't conceiving. It just wasn't happening. I start specifically adjusting. Now, listen, for everybody listening to me, I wasn't adjusting her my job wasn't to help her body get pregnant. That's not what I was doing. I analyzed her spine. I found stress in the spine, and my job was to restore motion in the joints of the spine and allow the brain to communicate and do its job. We all say that the power that made the body heals the body. But Reggie Gold said this, and this is what I follow. The power that made the body heals the body. No, it doesn't. It can, but it doesn't have to. And so what that does is that removes responsibility from us. It wasn't my responsibility to help her get pregnant. That wasn't my responsibility. My responsibility was to restore proper motion in this lady's spine. And I did that. And then she got pregnant. So that was the miracle. Well, fast forward, she decides to have a natural birth. So as she was getting ready to deliver at home, the baby got stuck in the birth canal. What they didn't know, this baby was 11 pounds. Wow. And Coleman was huge. So he got stuck in the birth canal. So they rushed her to the hospital. I get the phone call that night from the father, Mark. Dr. Young, we've got a problem. Christy had to get to the hospital, and they had to forcefully deliver Coleman. He's in ICU. They're not sure if he's going to make it through the night. There's something wrong. Can you come? And I said, well, Mark, I'm not licensed. I can't just walk into a hospital in ICU and start adjusting people. And he said, well, let me talk to the doctor on call here that's on the floor, and let me see if they'll let you come in. All right, now picture this. There's 7 hospitals in Oklahoma City, and there's hundreds and hundreds of doctors, and probably 1,000 babies being born. I had one patient of mine that was a pediatrician that was on call at that moment on that floor with that patient. Now tell me the odds of that happening are astronomical. And if people don't believe that there's a God, they're sadly mistaken, because he put that doctor in that place at that time. And that doctor, Dr. Roger, his kids are still patients of mine today. He said, if Dr. Young can do anything, have him come. So I show up at the hospital. There was a nurse waiting on me. And when I walked through the door, she said, you must be Uncle Tim. And I was confused. And then I started laughing. I get it. So I had to put on the frock and the hair thing and the booties and all the stuff. And I go into this ICU room, Alan. Standing there is Christy, the mom, Mark, 4 nurses, and then over in this little plastic bed with all these wires and all these things hooked up was Coleman. So I walked up to Christy, Alan, and she looked like she'd been hit by a bus. Her hair was all over the place. Her face was just beat up. Her eyes, there were no white. There was no white in her eyes. Every blood vessel in both eyes had exploded. They were blood red. I had never seen anything like it. And I looked at Mark, and Christy couldn't even talk. And I looked at Mark, and I said, what happened? And they said, well, Coleman got stuck in the birth canal. And when they got him in, they took their hand and they pushed him, turned him, and ripped him out. They ripped him out. And when they did, all that pressure that Christy went through busted blood vessels in her eyes. So, and it was amazing. So I turned around and I walked over to where Coleman was. And I looked up at the monitor, and there's all these things, and I didn't know what it meant, but I saw 2 things that I'll never forget. His heart rate was about almost 200 beats a minute. But it was just about ready to explode. But his respiration was just, he was barely breathing. So he could not keep up. And they didn't know, and no one knew what to do. They did all their tests. They couldn't figure out what was happening. So they just basically let him lay there and observing. So I reached, and this is another thing. When I looked down at Coleman, his eyes looked like his mom. Every blood vessel had exploded in both his eyes. It was, I hope everybody listening to this can picture this in your brain, how traumatic this was on this mom and this baby. And I reached through the wires, and I picked this little boy up, and I turned him, and I started palpating his back, and he had a fifth thoracic rib that was sticking out so far that you could almost see it through his skin. And I took my thumb and I set it, and it made the loudest cracking noise that you could possibly imagine. And I set him down. I palpated his atlas. The right atlas was pushed to the right and twisted. And I took my finger, and I just, with my little finger, and I made a little adjustment. and it clicked. And I laid him down and I looked at him. Alan, and I've told the story 1,000 times and I cannot articulate this moment other than this. This little boy took a deep breath. He had turned his head and looked at me and he breathed out. Immediately, the machine, the heart rate started coming down. The respiration started coming back up. We stood there and we watched it. Now, the funniest part about this whole thing, I turned around and there was an old nurse. There was 4 nurses. One of them was a lot older, and she was back there with her arms crossed. She was livid that I was there. She did not want me there. And she says this, well, those machines aren't that reliable anyway. And I just look at her and I wanted to say, I wish I could go back in time. I would say, well, then why do you stand here and worship it like it's the altar of God then? I walked over to Christy. I gave her a hug. I gave Mark a hug and I said, he'll be fine. And I just leave. I just walk out. It was a moment of time that time stood still. The next day, I'm in my office. Dr. Roger, the pediatrician, come to get an adjustment. And he said, Dr. Young, I don't know what you did. He said, but Coleman's going home today.
Wow.
Now, powerful, yes?
Well, it's made my eyes.
I got to finish the story. I got to finish the story. 1 year later, I get invited to Coleman's first birthday party. Now, if I went to every birthday party that I had a child done, I'd be going to birthday parties every day. And I never go. But my wife and I, we went to this one. Now, the father, Mark, was a pastor at a huge church. And so we went to the birthday party, and it was at the church. And there was over 100 people there. There were kids everywhere. And I got to looking around, and over half of them were new patients of mine from the last year because they told everybody and everybody in the church. But I didn't know they were all connected, right? It was just people coming to people. So they had a microphone. And so Mark, they was getting ready to, serve the cake and all that. And they were going to pray. And Mark started to talk and he started to cry. And Christy, and Mark used to be a professional wrestler, like on TV, the big pro wrestlers, he was a big old gruff guy. And he started to cry. And Christy took the mic from him. She goes, yo, you big baby, let me do it. And he couldn't talk. And she said, we're going to pray. And she said, and I don't remember the whole thing, but here's what she said. Lord, we want to thank you first and foremost for chiropractic. And we want to thank you for Dr. Young. Because if it wasn't for Dr. Young and chiropractic, Coleman wouldn't be here today. And I've told this story 1,000 times and I still tear up because I put myself in that moment. There was not a dry eye in this church. Everybody was crying. It was one of the most profound moments of my life that this little boy was alive because of a chiropractic adjustment. And now I take care of all 3 of his brother. He got 2 more, all 3 of them. There's 2 brothers. The family have been taking care of them. Coleman's 13 years old now, 14 years old. So people want to know, where do you get your certainty? Where do you get your passion? Where do you get your fire for chiropractic? Are you kidding me? And it's just a chiropractic adjustment, Alan. It's not a big deal. We just manipulate. What's the big deal? We just push on people's backs to make them feel better. No, we don't. We connect man, the spiritual, with man, the physical. We remove the interference from the brain to the tissue cell, and we amplify life, Alan. That's what we do. That's I could tell story after story like that, but that's one of my favorites.
Yeah, it's quite an emotional story, to be honest. I think, and one which I think a lot of people would have some relatability to. One of the other questions I've got for you is how most chiropractors at some time as join students have to run a second job, third job, whatever, as they're working their way through university, not just chiropractors, but any student. How did you manage to get through the early days of being a student yourself? How did you make ends meet?
Well, so yeah, what happened was here we have what we call student loans. And so I borrowed all the money getting through university, getting through chiropractic school. I came out of school with $160,000 in student loan debt. So my daughter just graduated. Well, a few years ago, she was $220,000. To put it in perspective, that's how expensive it is over here. But what happened when I got out of school, and my wife and I, we moved from Missouri to Oklahoma. When I came here, you got to build this. You got to put food on the table. You got to be able to provide. And when I moved here and I took a job working as an associate, but they weren't paying me anything. And I had a family I had a wife and 3 kids all of a sudden. So I would go to we have big rodeos here in Oklahoma. Oklahoma is in the middle of the United States. And not only that, it's Oklahoma. I mean, when you think of Oklahoma, you think of, Indians and buffaloes and horses, and so the rodeos, the major rodeos in the country are here in Oklahoma City. I mean, I can almost see the fairgrounds. If I was on top of my house, I could see it from my house. Well, what I would do is I would go to the rodeos, and all these people, just so everybody understands, everybody that rides horses, whether they do barrel racing or anything to do with the rodeo, 99% of them have a chiropractor back home. But what they do is they get in their trucks and they trailers and they haul their horses all the way to Oklahoma City from all over the country. So they maybe travel 12, 15, 16 hours just to get here. And there's a lot of cowboys and cowgirls here in Oklahoma that would come to these events. Well, I would take my portable table and I would set it up and I just put a sign up, chiropractic adjustment, $20. And they would, and they got to where they knew me, and all these events, and I would have a line. I mean, I would start adjusting people at 6 o'clock in the morning, and I wouldn't get done till 1 o'clock in the morning, and I'd get back there the next day. And I did this, like these events are a week long. I would do this as much as I possibly could. In a week's time, I would make over $1,000, $20 at a time. That put food on the table. That would provide Christmas for my kids. But what it did more than anything, it put people under my hands. It taught me, I worked on my technique and I made connections. And there was a, long story short, one of the cowboys, this was 1995. One of the cowboys, my table broke one day. My adjusting table, a portable table, it broke. So I pulled 2 hay bales up. If you guys know what hay bales are, I put 2 hay bales together and I started adjusting on these hay bales. And I adjusted Dale Landsberger on that hay bale. 1995. Fast forward, I finally get out on my own. I open my own office. There came an ice storm here in Oklahoma City. We don't get a lot of snow, but we get ice, and it shut the whole city down. But I showed up at my office. I was there, and I saw 2 people that day, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, and this was 1999. So I met Dale in 95. He comes into my office in 1999. I adjust him that morning, and it was the only person that morning. Fast forward today, I've taken care of him, his wife, his son, his son's wife, and now his grandson, Tobias, was just in last week. He's 19 years old, and I'm taking care of him because I showed up, because of a chiropractic adjustment, just like you said earlier. Listen, for everybody listening to this, the chiropractic adjustment, the chiropractic principle is the most important, powerful thing on the planet. And if we will embrace that and understand that, we can make a huge difference in a lot of lives.
Yeah, beautifully put. So another question I have for you is, obviously you've explained that you're writing a book. What was the inspiration behind writing this book?
It's fascinating. A few years ago, I was asked to speak on another podcast called Truth Talks, and it's based out of Colorado. And it was the guy I know, I'm really good friends with the guy that puts this podcast on. And he asked me to be on it because he knew my story. And so we just started talking about how I was raised and where I come from and how I went from just basically a poor hillbilly kid living in the hills of Missouri, no shoes, and, basically it's like something out of a movie, to where I'm at today. I've got one of the largest practices in the world. I got one of the largest coaching groups in the world. But I'm still that country kid, and he wanted it. And so we're talking about that. Well, when we got done with the podcast, it blew up. And if anybody wants to watch it, you can just put my name in, Truth Talks, Tim Young. You can watch that event. But anyway, the producers and everybody contacted me, said, we gotta put this in a book. So it went from, okay, we're going to write a book, to now the book is turned into a training manual. And the name of the book is going to be called It Had to Happen. Everything in my life, there was some crazy little things that happened that had to happen. in order for me to learn that lesson to go to the next lesson. And we're all that way. Everybody watching this, you're not a victim of your life. It had to happen the way it did, or you wouldn't be learning these lessons. So the whole book is based on my life and the lessons that I learned and how you can apply it to your life. So now it's turned into a whole training program. That's why it's taken so long to come out. So I'm hoping it'll be out this year. And when it is, I'll make sure everybody knows.
I'll certainly be buying that book myself. Listen, Tim, I've got so much gratitude. Thank you so much for coming on today. It's been amazing. It really has been amazing. So just want to thank you again from the bottom of my heart. Lots of gratitude, Tim. Thank you so much for coming on, and I hope that you'll join me again sometime. Thank you so much.
I'm so honored, and I appreciate your time, and I appreciate everybody's time that had to listen. And I finish with every conversation with every person I ever meet. If there's anything I can do for anyone, just please reach out. That's what I'm here for. I
don't doubt that at all, Tim. So if you've really enjoyed this particular podcast of Being Human, then please like, subscribe and share. And thanks again, Tim. Really appreciate you being on the podcast. Thank you.
Thank you.